Guilliman wrote the second founding ledger between 111 M31 and 121 M31. He created 23 new chapters from the Ultramarines gene stock: Novamarines, Aurora, Genesis, Inceptors. 23 names in the official record. 3 of those names, Aurora, Genesis, Inceptors, appear nowhere in the formal Ultramarines genealogy. Their gene seed did not come from Guilliman. It came from somewhere else. The Imperial archivists who drew up the ledger did not write that down. They were forbidden to. There is an honourable funeral hidden inside the Second Founding's records. It is for the Second Legion. There is no equivalent funeral for the 11th because there was no body to bury. That is the reading this channel is going to defend tonight, on the record, with apologies for taking this long to make it. It is the reading the audience of this channel made first, in the comments under 3 earlier videos, with citations the original videos did not have. The clearest of those comments ran, "The Second Legion was redistributed among the Ultramarines. The 11th was not." Guilliman later honored the Second's surviving Marines by setting aside distinct chapters for them during the Second Founding, namely the Aurora, the Genesis, and the Inceptors, and no trace of the 11th or its Marines can be found among any Ultramarine successor. 4 likes across 3 commenters across 2 videos. That was the correction. It was correct. The channel has been conflating the 2 cases. The video you are watching now is the correction, so begin where the audience began, with the count. Count the foundings. The first founding produced 18 Primarchs and 18 legions on record, with 2 legions and 2 Primarchs expunged so completely that only the gaps survive. The second founding, decreed 7 Terran years after the death of Horus, produced the daughter chapters of those who survived the heresy intact. The largest survivor was Guilliman's 13th. The Apocrypha of Scaros, the oldest known copy of the Codex Astartes, written in Guilliman's own hand and now a crumbling tome held under seal, claims that the Ultramarines sired 23 primogenitor chapters during the Second Founding. The Apocrypha does not list all 23. The omission is canonical. It was canonical when Guilliman wrote it. That gap in the list is the slot where the Second Legion's funeral is hidden. The official record states the gene seed of the Aurora chapter, the Genesis chapter, and the Inceptors all descends from Robute Guilliman. Read the Lexicanum entry. Read the Codex Space Marines 9th edition. Read the Primogenitor chapters article. Every Imperial document that names them attributes their gene line to the 13th Legion. The official record is consistent. The channel is not contradicting the official record. The channel is pointing at a gap inside it. Here is what the gap looks like. The Genesis chapter is canonically the first Ultramarine successor ever raised. It is named Genesis because it is the beginning of the Second Founding. Its homeworld is New Found, which is located per the chapter's own lore, a comparatively short distance to the galactic northwest of the Ultramarines' realm of Ultramar. It is dogmatically loyal. It carries Guilliman's gene seed. That is the record. What the record does not explain is why a chapter founded to mark the beginning of the Second Founding chose the name Genesis instead of the more obvious choices, filiation, primogenitor, apex, and why it was given a homeworld in a direction the Ultramarines do not have a recorded reason to settle. The Aurora chapter is descended from the Ultramarines' 4th chapter, the Aurorans, who fought on the continent of Ithraka during the betrayal of Ithraka in 007 M31, alongside the 24th Ultramarines chapter and Legio Praesagius, against the Word-Bearers and Legio Sutervora. The 4th chapter's armored formations became the Aurora chapter at the Second Founding. Its homeworld is Firestorm, an industrial macrofactorum world. The chapter is master of armored assault. The chapter, per Bolter and Chainsword forum sources citing chapter lore, refuses to attack civilized Xeno species without provocation, a position that has earned it scrutiny from Puritan inquisitors building cases against its tolerance, and which is not a posture the Codex Astartes models for any chapter. The chapter is named for an ancient Terran patron of hope, renewal, and the new dawn. The chapter was founded in honor of Sergeant Artus Kanan. The Inceptors are a primogenitor chapter of the Ultramarines, created at the Second Founding. They were nearly destroyed in the early 41st millennium during the Macharian heresy, in a feud with the Doom Warriors over a matter of honor. The two chapters fought under predetermined rules of engagement and refused to end the conflict. The Minotaurs were dispatched to end it for them. The Doom Warriors escaped the Euxine system. The Inceptors were stranded on Euxine and systematically destroyed. Fewer than 100 Marines remained. 3 chapters, 3 official Ultramarines successors, each one of them carrying, per the official record, Guilliman's gene seed. Each one of them, per the channel's reading, slotted into the unlisted gap inside the Apocrypha of Scaros. Now consider what unifies the 3 names: Genesis, beginning; Aurora, dawn; Inceptors, those who initiate, those who start. 3 names that all mean the same thing in 3 slightly different registers. The other 20 primogenitor chapters do not cluster like this. The Novamarines are named for their newness as a chapter. The Black Consuls and the White Consuls are named for the Roman magistracy Guilliman modeled his administrative apparatus on. The Doom Eagles, the Iron Snakes, the Mortifactors carry the iconography of war. The Eagle Warriors, the Silver Eagles, the Patriarchs of Ulixis are named for their relationship to the Imperial Aquila and to the Ultramar founder myth. None of the other 20 are named for a beginning, for a dawn, for a starting over. 3 out of 23 are, and those 3 are clustered together in the channel's reading because they are the ones the Second's veterans were folded into. The naming is the honorific. The naming is the funeral the Imperium would not let Guilliman speak out loud. You can verify the clustering yourself in any current codex supplement or in the Lexicanum Primogenitor chapter's entry. 20 chapters named for war, lineage, or geography. 3 chapters named for the act of beginning again. 3 chapters, the channel argues, for a legion that was permitted to begin again under a new name. You see what the gap permits. What it permits is the channel's thesis. The thesis is this: the Second Legion was not killed. The Second Legion was redistributed. Its surviving Marines were absorbed into Guilliman's 13th during the period when, per the Imperial archives themselves, the Ultramarines' numbers swelled to eclipse every other Loyalist legion. The fandom canon entry on the Lost Primarchs admits the redistribution in hedged language. Their thousands of Space Marines vanished from Imperial rosters, though they may have been quietly absorbed into the Ultramarines and Imperial fists. May have been. The Imperium will not commit, but the numbers do. After the Edict of Obliteration, the Ultramarines doubled, and the channel argues that when Guilliman built the Second Founding Ledger, he honored what he had received. The chapters he raised from the absorbed gene stock were not numbered like the others. They were named Genesis, for the beginning that the Second never reached; Aurora, for the dawn the Second was killed before they could see; Inceptors, for the ones who started. They are not the only Second Founding chapters. They are the ones whose names carry the weight of a funeral the Imperium would not let Guilliman speak out loud. That is the channel's reading. Black Library has not written it down. No primary source confirms it. The audience reached it first. Now, consider the 11th. The 11th Legion's Marines do not appear in the Ultramarines gene line. They do not appear in the Imperial Fists gene line. They do not appear in any of the 13 foundings the Imperium has on record. They do not appear at all. There is no chapter named for them. There is no honorific. There is no funeral. The Edict of Obliteration, which Lexicanum describes as the most successful edict in Imperial history, the deletion of all records from the Imperial archives in reference to the two lost Primarchs of the 2nd and 11th Space Marine Legions. That edict did the same paperwork for both legions. The paperwork was identical. The aftermath was not. The 11th's Marines were not absorbed.
They were not redistributed.
They are not survived in any documented gene line of any Space Marine in the Imperium of Man as of the closing of the 41st millennium. The official record contains no equivalent of the Aurora Genesis Inceptor honorific for the 11th. The Apocrypha of Scaros's omitted list, the gap that the 2nd was fitted into, has no 11th-shaped slot beside it. The 11th was not buried. The 11th was erased. That is the canonical distinction the audience has been demanding the channel make. The canonical evidence for the distinction is the absence itself. Where the 2nd has hedged absorption language in the secondary sources, the 11th has none. Where the 2nd has unlisted primogenitor space in the founding codex, the 11th has none. Where the 2nd has Marines who may have been quietly absorbed into the 13th, the 11th has Marines who may have been quietly killed.
Consider what an Imperial purge of an entire legion would have required.
A legion, at full crusade strength, carried somewhere between 10 and 100,000 Astartes, the wider heresy-era reckoning. Even after the Rangdan losses, the 11th's surviving Marines would have numbered in the thousands. Those thousands had to be located. Those thousands had to be detached from active crusade operations under whatever pretext the Imperium could fabricate. Those thousands had to be brought to whatever site the execution would be performed at. Those thousands had to be killed. And then the bodies had to be disposed of in such a way that no archaeo-ossuary anywhere in the Imperium of mankind, in the 10,000 years since, would ever turn up a single recognizable gene marker from any one of them.
No Imperial scholar, no Magos biologist, no inquisitor working a cold case has ever, in the entire recorded canon, produced a single confirmed gene seed sample attributable to the 11th Legion. That is the measure of how completely it was done. Not just records destroyed, bodies destroyed, bones destroyed. Down to whatever level of granularity an Astartes body can be destroyed at by Imperial means in the early 31st millennium, which is to say, down to the molecular level. Whatever was left of the 11th after the Rangdan was finished off and disposed of with an industrial completeness the Imperium has not deployed on any other internal target since. That is what purge means in the canonical sense for the 11th. Not redistribution, not absorption, not quiet retirement into another legion. Executions, conducted across whatever time frame the operation required.
And a follow-up program of gene seed destruction so thorough that the 11th's gene line is now archaeologically extinct in the Imperium. The Damnatio Memoriae erased the paperwork. The wet work erased the men. The two went together. The official record says nothing about either legion. The unofficial weight of what the record does not say is what differs. But here is what the records say otherwise. Both legions went to the Rangdan Xenocides. The single in-universe document that confirms the existence of the lost legions, a rare record accidentally placed into copies of the Astra Militarum's Imperial Infantryman's Uplifting Primer in the 41st millennium, revealed that the long-lost 2nd and the 11th Legions of the ancient Space Marines participated in the campaigns of the Rangdan Genocides during the Great Crusade in the 860s of the 30th millennium.
The Rangdan Genocides were 3 campaigns fought from approximately 839 to 890 of the 30th millennium against a Xenos threat the Imperium has been forbidden by the Inquisition to discuss in any open publication. The Second Rangdan Genocide began in 862 M30. Imperial losses across the 3 campaigns reached 80,000 Astartes dead, a casualty figure not exceeded until the heresy itself. The Dark Angels were reduced to roughly a tenth of their strength. Both lost legions were there. Both came back broken. Both apparently ceased to exist during or shortly after the conflict. The Imperial Infantryman's Primer leak is the only document that puts them in the same place at the same time, doing the same job. Consider what that proximity means. The 2 legions were not erased for 2 unrelated crimes scattered across the breadth of the Crusade. They were erased for 2 crimes that happened on the same campaign, against the same enemy, in the same decade. Whatever the Rangdan did to the 2nd, the Rangdan did to the 11th as well, or did something close enough that the Imperium's archivists, sifting the aftermath, judged them both as having crossed the same kind of line. The Rangdan are described in the secondary sources as a Xenos threat that deployed mind control or psychic taint at scale. The campaigns broke the Dark Angels and required the deployment of multiple legions and, per some readings, the Emperor's own intervention. Whatever instrument the Rangdan deployed against the 2nd and the 11th, it left them in a condition the Imperium could not accept back into the active crusade without curated handling. The 2nd was curated by absorption. The 11th was curated by extinction. That is the channel's reading of the curation, and it is the reading that asks the most uncomfortable question, namely, what differentiated the 2nd's compromised state from the 11th's compromised state, such that one was salvageable and the other was not? The Imperium does not answer the question. The Imperium has spent 10,000 years not answering the question. The channel cannot answer the question either, because no Black Library novel and no Forge World Black book is permitted to answer the question. But the question is the question, and the question only exists if you separate the 2 cases. What happened next is what diverges, and that is the channel's point. Consider this. The 2nd came back from the Rangdan with whatever the Rangdan had done to them, and whatever the Rangdan had done to them was forgivable to the Emperor, or at least manageable. The Emperor judged the 2nd. The Emperor permitted Guilliman to absorb the survivors. The Emperor permitted Guilliman to honor them, quietly, in the 2nd founding's omitted list. The crime of the 2nd was a crime the Imperium could survive without admitting it. So the Imperium did not admit it. The Imperium buried the 2nd inside its own successor chapters. The 11th came back from the Rangdan with whatever the Rangdan had done to them, and whatever the Rangdan had done to them was not forgivable to the Emperor. The Emperor judged the 11th. The Emperor did not permit absorption. The Emperor did not permit honoring. The Emperor permitted erasure. The crime of the 11th was a crime the Imperium could not survive admitting, so the Imperium did not admit it. The Imperium erased the 11th inside its own silence. 2 crimes, 2 judgments, 2 different mechanisms of disappearance. One legion got a funeral, the other got a damnatio memoriae, Latin for the condemnation of memory.
Consider what kind of crime the seconds must have been.
Forgivable enough that Guilliman, the most rigid by the Codex Primarch of the 18, was permitted to accept the survivors into his own legion. Forgivable enough that Guilliman built 3 chapters out of those survivors and named those chapters for the act of beginning again, which is a public statement, even if the public is not allowed to read it. Forgivable enough that the Emperor permitted Guilliman to do it, but unforgivable enough that the official record had to be erased anyway. The second's crime was the kind of crime that an institution can survive admitting privately, in code, to one Primarch and one Codex author, but cannot survive admitting in plain language to the watching billions of the Imperium. The second did something the Imperium could carry on a secret ledger, but not on a public one. The Imperium has a secret ledger. It is the Apocrypha of Scaros's Unlisted 3. Consider what kind of crime the 11th must have been. Unforgivable to such a degree that
Absorption was not permitted. Unforgivable to such a degree that honor by daughter chapter was not permitted. Unforgivable to such a degree that even private memorialization by one Primarch in one codex was not permitted. Unforgivable to such a degree that the execution had to be carried to molecular completeness so that no one, 10,000 years on, could turn up a single gene marker and ask what the marker came from. The 11th's crime was the kind of crime an institution cannot survive carrying on any ledger, secret or public. The 11th's crime had to be made not to have happened. The mechanism by which you make something not to have happened is to destroy every trace it left, in every register, including the biological one. The Imperium did that. The Imperium has, in canon, carried out exactly one edict of obliteration at this level of completeness.
Per the canon entry on the edict, the most successful edict of obliteration carried out in Imperial history was the deletion of all records from the Imperial archives in reference to the 2 lost Primarchs of the 2nd and 11th Space Marine legions. The most successful, singular. The Imperium has erased traitor chapters, traitor Primarchs, traitor Inquisitors, traitor cult cardinals, and entire renegade forge worlds in the 10,000 years since the heresy. None of those erasures reached the level of completeness the 11ths reached. None of them is described in any current canon as the most successful. The 11th's purge is the high watermark. It is, in the most literal imperial accounting, the standard against which every later erasure is measured, and the Imperium is not in the habit of producing high watermarks in this particular operation. It is in the habit of refining the operation. The 11th was the test case. The 11th was the rehearsal. Everything the Inquisition has done since, the 11th's executioners did first. What nobody mentions is the mechanism for executing that distinction. The official record does not name an executioner. The official record names no one as having killed any lost Primarch. The official record offers damnatio memoriae as an administrative outcome with no agent. But the administrative outcome required a hand. The Edict of Obliteration is not self-executing. Someone, in 860 of the 30th millennium or shortly thereafter, walked into the 11th Marines and ended them. Someone walked into the 11th archives and burned them. Someone, finally, walked into the 11th Primarch and did whatever it was that the 11th Primarch's body, brain, and gene coil now no longer permits any author at Black Library to describe. The channel has, in a previous video, named that someone.
In the Subject 11 was loyal to the Emperor and Magnus killed him video, the channel argued that the executioner was Magnus the Red, Primarch of the 15th. The channel's argument anchors on Magnus's documented absence from the active crusade roles during a specific window of the 30th millennium. Magnus was discovered on Prospero in 840 of the 30th millennium. The Thousand Sons did not officially join the crusade for nearly 100 standard years after his discovery, because the Legion was recovering from the mutation crisis that nearly destroyed it. That recovery period covers roughly 840 to 940 of the 30th millennium. The channel's narrower window, between 927 and 964 of the 30th millennium, is not documented in any primary Black library source. It is the channel's reading. But it is compatible with canon, and it sits inside the period when Magnus was, per the Imperial archives, doing something else than what he eventually claimed to remember doing.
A shard of Magnus, per the Lexicanum canon entry, barely knew where or when he was at the best of times, and was constantly forgetting who his companions were or what had been done to him. That is, post-heresy Magnus, a literally shattered soul. The channel's argument is that the post-heresy fragmentation is not the only fracture Magnus's memory carries. The channel argues there is an earlier scar. The scar's edges are the 927 to 964 window. The scar's shape is the absence of the 11th. The channel's reading, not Black libraries, treat as such. But the record does not contradict it. The record is silent in the exact place the channel's reading puts the 11th's death. You see what the silence permits. It permits the thesis that Magnus was the instrument. It permits the thesis that the Emperor was the warrant. It permits the thesis that the Emperor judged the 11th as unfit for the Imperium to remember, and that the Emperor chose the most reliably forgetting Primarch in the Crusade, the Primarch whose own legion was recovering from mutation trauma and whose own access to memory was already fragile, to do the work and to be the place the work could be hidden inside afterwards. Or it permits other readings. The Pontius, on YouTube, has argued that the executioners were Leman Russ and the Space Wolves, deployed by the Emperor to end the Second after the Rangdan tainted it with a mind virus. The Pontius's read assigns the Second the purged fate and the 11th the forgotten fate. That is the inverse of the channel's read. The community is split. No primary source resolves the split. The split is genuine. The channel takes the position the audience has demanded. The Second is buried. The 11th is erased. The hand that did the erasing was Magnus's. Whether or not it was Magnus's, the erasure happened. And consider what the choice of executioner, if it was Magnus, tells you about the Emperor's design. The Emperor did not choose Russ, who would have done it and remembered it and written it down somewhere in the Wolf King's own oral histories that the Space Wolves preserve unbroken across millennia. The Emperor did not choose Dorn, who, per Abnett's Lightning Tower, was canonically incapable of lying even when deception would have aided his cause. Dorn would have carried the memory openly, in defiance of the cover-up, because Dorn's nature is the human quest for truth. The Emperor did not choose the Lion, who would have recorded the operation in the Dark Angel's secret First Order archives and used the knowledge later as leverage. The Emperor did not choose Kurz, who would have enjoyed it and written about it. The Emperor chose, per the channel's prior reading, the one Primarch whose access to his own memory was already canonically fragile. The one Primarch whose legion was, in the years immediately surrounding the 11th's death, occupied with recovering from a mutation crisis that had nearly destroyed it. The one Primarch who had been forbidden in subtle institutional ways to ask questions about his own past, who was, even before Tzeentch began grooming him, the most reliably forgetting Primarch in the Emperor's roster. That is a doctrinal choice. That is not an accident.
The emperor needed an executioner who would not remember the execution. The emperor needed an executioner whose memory could later be made to develop a scar in the right place.
The emperor needed an executioner who would, in 10,000 years, ascend to demon princehood and lose his soul to shattering, so that even if some shard of him eventually remembered what had been done, no imperial institution would believe a word a demon primarch of Tzeentch said about anything. The emperor needed plausible deniability that lasted forever. Magnus was the perfect choice, whether or not Magnus did it. What that tells you is what the cover-up is for. The Imperium has been conflating the two cases for 10,000 years. The Imperium has been allowing the lore community and channels like this one in earlier videos to treat them as one event because the Imperium benefits from the conflation. If the two cases are one case, then the audience never asks why two Primarchs got two different fates. If the two cases are one case, then the audience never asks what crime the second committed that the Imperium could survive admitting through its successor chapters, and what crime the 11th committed that the Imperium could not survive admitting at all. If the two cases are one case, then the audience never asks who decided which Primarch got which fate, and why, and on what authority. The Imperium benefits from the third story. The third story is the one where there were two lost brothers, and they were both lost, and the loss is sad, and the Imperium grieves. That third story sells a unified mournfulness that asks no questions. The first story, the second Redistributed, asks who chose the redistribution and what was being honored. The second story, the 11th Purged, asks who chose the purge and what was being silenced. Either question, asked separately, opens a door the Imperium has spent 10,000 years welding shut.
This is why the channel has been wrong to conflate the two cases. The conflation does the Imperium's work. The channel's audience saw the conflation and named it. The channel is correcting on the record. The truth is, once you restore the distinction, the two stories become interrogable. You can ask why Guilliman buried one but not the other. You can ask what Guilliman knew about the second's crime that allowed him to absorb the survivors and quietly honor the gene line in his own daughter chapters. You can ask why the Aurora chapter refuses to attack civilized Xenos without provocation, when the Codex Astartes models no such posture for any chapter, and whether that posture is a Guilliman doctrine the second's veterans brought with them. You can ask why the Genesis chapter was named for beginnings and given a homeworld at the galactic northwest of Ultramar rather than inside it. You can ask why the Inceptors, who carry that name, were nearly destroyed in the Macarian heresy by a chapter, the Minotaurs, whose own dark canon record the channel has covered before. And you can ask why the 11th got no chapter, no name, no homeworld, no daughter line. You can ask why Magnus, who according to the channel's prior reading is the executioner, has a documented gap in his memory in the exact window when the 11th was being unmade. You can ask why Subject 11 sits in the dark cells beneath the Imperial Palace today, guarded by the Adeptus Custodes Shadowkeeper's shield host, under runic locks and psychic wards, and why the Custodes Codex names him without explaining him. You can ask whether Subject 11 is one of the 11th's Marines, kept alive as a single living witness to what the Imperium destroyed. You can ask whether he is the 11th Primarch himself, surviving because the Emperor's hand stopped at the threshold of execution, and Subject 11 is the record the Imperium kept just in case. You can ask, beyond that, what kind of Emperor builds an execution and erasure program on his own son, completes it, and then keeps a hostage from the same legion locked in a cell beneath his own throne for the next 10,000 years.
You can ask whether that hostage is leverage against an outcome the emperor anticipated, or whether the hostage is a guilty conscience the emperor could not bring himself to extinguish, or whether the hostage is, and this is the Aaron Dembski-Bowden reading from Master of Mankind, simply a tool, kept on the shelf in case it became useful, treated by its keeper with the same instrumental dismissal the emperor canonically extended to the Primarchs themselves. It is said they have always called you father. It seems so sentimental. That is the emperor of the Master of Mankind. That is the emperor who would, in the 30th millennium, order one of his sons to kill another of his sons, and order a third of his sons to bury the survivors, and arrange the paperwork so that none of them remembered any of it clearly afterwards. That is the emperor the audience is being asked to take seriously. The Imperium would prefer that the audience took seriously a different emperor,
the warm cathedral icon of the imperial truth, the emperor of stained glass and golden mosaic. The two emperors are the same emperor. The cover-up is what holds them both up in the same mind. You can ask, finally, why Rogel Dorn, walking past the empty plinths in the investiary on Holy Terra during the siege, in Dan Abnett's Lightning Tower short story, paused at the 2nd and the 11th and thought to himself the exact phrase that organizes this video. His interior monologue is canonical. Quote, "The 2nd and 11th plinths had been vacant for a long time. No one ever spoke of those two absent brothers. Their separate tragedies had seemed like aberrations. Had they in fact been warnings that no one had heeded? Separate tragedies, not one tragedy, two."
Dorn, who Abnett's Lightning Tower establishes embodies the human quest for truth and is incapable of lying even when deception would have aided his cause, looks at the two empty plinths and names the two absences separately. The phrase does specific work. It is the textual proof that the channel and the audience are reading the lore correctly. The two cases are two cases. Dorn knew it, the channel knows it now. The audience knew it first. Two lost Primarchs, two different judgments. The Imperium kept them confused on purpose, because if you can keep two stories blurred together, you have created a third story that doesn't ask any questions. The audience of this channel made the distinction first, in the comments, with citations. We're making it on screen now, with apologies for not making it sooner. The 2nd was buried. The 11th was erased. Burial is a kind of memorial. Erasure is a kind of confession. The Imperium has confessed to one of these two crimes. Through the Aurora chapters, every founding day, in the way they fold their banners. The other crime has no folding. The other crime has no chapter. The other crime has no day.